chapter, I discuss Sen's view on the relationship between democracy and development, focusing on his notion of development as freedom. Sen's ideas have been quite influential in the field of development studies, policies, and practices, as exemplified by the Human Development Reports published by UNDP every year. The Human Development Index is a measure developed from Sen's capability approach. Sen developed his approach as a critique of the existing approaches to understanding human well-being. For instance, the utilitarian approach, which gives primacy to subjective well-being of individuals, and the Rawlsian approach, which focuses on primary goods. The capability approach sees development as the expansion of human capabilities, capability being a person's ability to be and do what she or he has reason to value. At the same time, as capability represents substantive freedoms, development could be seen as freedom, where freedom is both the means of achieving development as well as the end. Freedom is thus at once the means and the end of development. Thus, Sen makes a distinction between agency freedom and well-being freedom constituting each other and are constitutive of development. This leads us to the normative argument that the objective of development should be to remove all unfreedoms. For Sen, it can be achieved within the framework of a democratic polity. Indeed, Sen's capability approach is committed to a democratic polity, not merely in terms of a majoritarian rule, but in terms of the political spaces available within the democratic state for demanding development. Sen has time and again argued that democracies with a free press have historically avoided famines. Democratic participation and deliberation are the hallmarks of the democracy pictured by Sen. This is crucial for the formation of values and the choices to be made in terms of development by the society concerned. Sen's capability approach to development as freedom necessitates participatory democracy. He argues that it should be left to each society to decide on the capability sets and functionings they have reason to value. And it should be decided through public reasoning. For Sen, democracy is thus the embodiment of collective reasoning and the cornerstone of development as freedom. Sen has, however, been criticized for not paying sufficient attention to factors that limit possible democratic engagements within democratic societies. For example, the power relations between social classes and social groups, the existing property relations, and so on. I would argue that it is important to recognize the ideological character of the liberal democratic state and the consequent choice of development trajectories. The great masters, Adam Smith and Karl Marx, had expressed their fears that the liberal democratic state apparatus would function to defend the interests of the rich against that of the poor. It has not changed much since then in this regard. Liberal democratic states largely function to facilitate the activities of accumulation by the bourgeoisie. The public reasoning Sen has envisaged within such a democracy would largely result in bourgeois reasoning with the purpose of legitimizing their hegemonic interests. In my view, if the democratic deliberations and public reasoning are to be substantive and meaningful, it needs to assume a radical dimension in order to reach a consensus that would uphold values of equity and social justice from the standpoint of the marginalized and the underclasses. Sen is indeed an analyst par excellence. He cleverly intertwines his analysis with liberal democratic imperatives, while mostly using the term democracy or democratic societies. What Sen does not delve into is the type of democracy that is conducive for development as freedom. He often invokes the example of India as a democracy with free press, etc., and hence did not experience famines after independence. For a vast majority of Indian population, however, there has neither been development nor freedom even after 7 decades of independence. The post-independence consensus on democratic socialism, with a substantial developmental role for the state has been derailed with the advent of neoliberal globalization and the capitalist restructuring that ensued. With the diminution of the state, including disinvestment and the promotion of transnational and domestic corporations, the development and freedoms of the working class and other marginalized social groups, including women, have been on the path of erosion. More and more public resources are being privatized and transferred to big capital. More and more developmental resources are siphoned up to corporations in the form of tax cuts and subsidies. Therefore, we need to take a position and argue for the nature of the democracy and the democratic state that are necessary for achieving development as freedom. Such a democracy needs to be fought for and won and defended against the power of capital. It is obvious that we need a democracy that is committed to the underprivileged classes and social groups in order to achieve development as freedom. A democratic state that owes its allegiance to the privileged classes and social groups is far from achieving that. While Sen's analysis of development as freedom is valuable in its own right, the critique takes it forward, albeit in more radical directions. Thank you.